Princess Lyra Vexhai stood before the crystalline window of her tower chamber, watching the parade of starships descend through Zephyria's pearl-white atmosphere. Each vessel carried another suitor, another arrogant noble who saw her as nothing more than a prize to be claimed. The sight made her stomach churn with disgust. "Your Highness," came the melodious voice of her attendant, Zira, "the High Counselors require your presence for the final preparations." Lyra turned from the window, her iridescent blue skin catching the light of Zephyria's twin suns. Like all Zephyrians, she possessed an ethereal beauty that had made her species coveted throughout the galaxy, tall, graceful, with silver hair that flowed like liquid starlight and eyes the color of deep space. Her delicate features bore the aristocratic angles of her bloodline, and her slender frame moved with the fluid grace that made her people legendary dancers and diplomats. But today that beauty felt like a curse. "Tell me, Zira," Lyra said, adjusting the ceremonial golden circlet that marked her royal status, "what do you see when you look at those ships?" The young attendant glanced nervously toward the window. "I see honored guests arriving for your mating ceremony, Your Highness." "I see vultures," Lyra replied bitterly, "circling, waiting to devour what remains of my freedom." The Zephyrian mating ceremony was an ancient tradition, one that bound their people to strategic alliances across the galaxy. At 25, Lyra had reached the age where she must choose a mate from among the assembled nobles, or the High Council would choose for her. The thought of being claimed by someone like Prince Vorthak of the Siege Armada, a cruel warrior who collected wives like trophies, made her skin crawl. "Your Highness," Zira said gently, "perhaps among this year's suitors you might find someone different." Lyra laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Different? Have you seen the guest list? 3 warlords, 2 merchant princes, a plutocrat from the mining guild, and that insufferable Prince Zerion who speaks of nothing but his dragon-hunting expeditions across the Outer Rim. They see me as breeding stock, Zira. A way to gain access to our planet's quantum crystals and strategic position in the galactic trade routes." She walked to her dresser, where the ceremonial mating gown lay spread like captured starlight. The garment was a masterpiece of Zephyrian craftsmanship, woven from threads of pure energy that shifted between silver and gold, embedded with gems that pulsed with their own inner light. The bodice was adorned with crystalline formations that would amplify her natural luminescence, making her glow like a living constellation. It was beautiful. It was also a chain. From the window came the distant sound of voices, harsh, guttural laughter echoing from the palace courtyards below. Lyra's enhanced hearing picked up fragments of conversation between the arriving nobles. "The Zephyrian princess will make a fine addition to my collection. Her genetics will produce strong offspring. Her planet's resources alone are worth enduring her likely frigidity. These alien females think too much. Dragons may be nearly extinct, but these ethereal creatures are almost as exotic to conquer." The words hit her like physical blows. She pressed her palms against the window, her breath fogging the crystal. In the gardens far below, she could see movement among the ancient ruins that dotted the palace grounds, forgotten remnants of the old kingdom that had ruled this world before her ancestors claimed it, now serving as mere decoration for her family's seat of power. "They built this palace on the graves of dragons," Lyra whispered, remembering her grandmother's stories. "The old kingdom fell 3,000 years ago when the ancestral dragons were hunted to extinction. Now look what we've become. Merchants selling our daughters to the highest bidder." "Your Highness, such talk," Zira warned nervously, "is treason." Lyra turned from the window, her eyes blazing. "The truth often is, dear Zira. My grandmother told me stories of the time before, when dragons ruled the stars and there was honor in the galaxy, when beings chose their mates for love, not political advantage." The sound of trumpets echoed through the palace, announcing the formal beginning of the ceremony. Soon she would be expected to enter the great hall, smile graciously, and allow herself to be inspected like livestock at a market. The very thought made her want to tear off the golden circlet and flee into the night. "The ceremony begins in 1 hour," Zira said softly, beginning to arrange the elaborate headdress that would complete Lyra's ceremonial attire. "The council expects you to choose before midnight, or they'll auction me off to Prince Vorthak, since he's offered the most lucrative trade agreement." Lyra's voice was hollow. 50 years of exclusive mining rights to our quantum crystal deposits, unrestricted access to our shipping lanes, and military protection from the Void Raiders, all for the small price of my freedom and dignity." She stared down at the shadowy ruins below, where something moved among the crumbling stones. For just a moment she thought she saw a figure there, hunched, solitary, forgotten like the ruins themselves. Something about that lonely silhouette called to her, a kinship in isolation that she couldn't explain. "Your Highness," Lyra said carefully, "I know this is difficult, but perhaps marriage to a powerful lord could bring you influence, ways to help our people that you cannot achieve as an unmarried princess." "Help them?" Lyra laughed bitterly. "By becoming a broodmare for alien nobles who see our entire species as curiosities to be collected? By legitimizing the very system that reduces sentient beings to trade commodities?" She turned from the window, her decision crystallizing. "No, Lyra, there has to be another way." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Lyra said, looking once more at the figure moving through the ruins below, "that perhaps it's time this princess reminded herself what freedom feels like, even if only for a few moments before I surrender it forever." As Lyra bustled about preparing the final touches for the ceremony, Lyra's gaze drifted once more to the gardens below. That lonely figure in the ruins seemed to move with a strange, ancient grace despite its obvious poverty. Something about its solitary existence resonated with her own trapped soul. Soon, she told herself, soon she would have to choose her golden cage. But not yet. Not yet. The ceremonial hall blazed with the light of 1,000 floating crystals, each one singing in harmonic resonance, as the galaxy's most powerful nobles gathered to witness the claiming of Princess Lyra. The air thrummed with barely contained arrogance and greed as lords, princes, and merchants displayed their wealth like plumage. Lyra stood at the center of it all, resplendent in her mating gown, feeling like a sacrifice on an altar. Prince Vorthak's predatory gaze never left her, his scaled hands already reaching possessively in her direction whenever she glanced his way. The plutocrat from the mining guild whispered calculations to his aide, treating her like a mathematical equation. Prince Zerion regaled nearby guests with graphic details of his latest dragon hunt, his eyes promising he would enjoy conquering her with similar brutality. "Lords and ladies of the Galactic Assembly," High Chancellor Morvex announced, his voice echoing through the vast chamber, "we gather tonight to witness the sacred bonding of our beloved Princess Lyra with her chosen mate. Let the presentations begin." One by one, the suitors stepped forward to make their formal offers. Each speech was more nauseating than the last, promises of protection that sounded like threats, declarations of admiration that focused solely on her breeding potential, gifts that were clearly bribes for political access. When Prince Vorthak stepped forward, his massive form towering over the assembly, Lyra felt her last reserves of composure cracking. "Princess Lyra," he rumbled, his voice like grinding stone, "I offer you the protection of my war fleets, the wealth of conquered worlds, and the honor of bearing warriors worthy of galactic conquest. Accept my claim, and your people will prosper under my strength." The crowd murmured approval. The High Chancellor nodded encouragingly. Lyra felt the walls closing in around her like a tomb. She began, then stopped. Every eye in the chamber was fixed on her, waiting for her surrender. "I require a moment to consider such generous offers." "Your Highness," Chancellor Morvex said carefully, "the ceremony must conclude before midnight. Perhaps—" "I said I need a moment," Lyra snapped, surprising herself with her vehemence. The assembled nobles shifted uncomfortably at her tone. Surely a decision of such magnitude deserves proper contemplation. Before anyone could protest, she gathered her luminous skirts and swept from the hall, ignoring the shocked whispers that followed in her wake. She could hear Chancellor Morvex making diplomatic excuses to the suitors, but she didn't care. She needed air. She needed space. She needed to remember who she was before they buried her alive in political necessity. The palace gardens were bathed in moonlight, the twin moons of Zephyria casting everything in silver and shadow. Lyra kicked off her ceremonial shoes and ran barefoot across the manicured lawns, her gown trailing behind her like liquid starlight. She ran until her lungs burned, until the sounds of the ceremony faded to a distant murmur, until she found herself among the ancient ruins her grandmother had told her about in childhood stories. The old kingdom ruins were forbidden to casual visitors, crumbling towers and broken archways that predated her family's reign by millennia. Legend claimed they had been built by the first settlers of Zephyria, back when dragons still ruled the stars and the galaxy was young. Now they stood as monuments to forgotten dreams, slowly being reclaimed by flowering vines and crystalline moss that glowed softly in the darkness. Lyra collapsed onto a broken stone bench, finally allowing herself to weep. The tears came in great heaving sobs that shook her entire frame. She cried for her lost freedom, for the childhood dreams that were being suffocated by duty, for the love she would never know because her heart was considered a commodity to be traded. "Why are you crying, pretty star lady?" The voice startled her so badly she nearly fell from the bench. Through her tears, she made out a figure emerging from the deeper shadows of the ruins. A dragon, but unlike any she had seen in the royal menageries. This creature was clearly destitute, his scales dull and patched with scars, his wings tattered at the edges. He was roughly humanoid in shape, but retained distinctly draconic features, an elongated snout, small horns, and eyes that glowed amber in the darkness. His clothes were little more than rags, and he moved with the careful caution of someone accustomed to being unwelcome. You shouldn't be here," Lyra said, wiping her eyes. "The palace grounds are restricted." The dragon beggar tilted his head, studying her with ancient eyes that seemed far too old for his relatively young appearance. "So are tears of true sorrow, Star Lady. Yet here we both are, breaking rules." His voice carried an odd accent, one she couldn't place. There was something in his tone, a gentleness that she hadn't heard from any of the nobles in the ceremony hall. No calculation, no desire to possess or conquer, just kindness. "I am Kael," he said simply, settling onto another broken stone several feet away, careful not to crowd her. "I come to these ruins sometimes when the city folk throw stones instead of coins. The old stones don't judge, and they remember when dragons had dignity." "You speak strangely for a beggar," Lyra observed. Kael's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "Perhaps I read too much in the refuse heaps, found books teach interesting words." He gestured to the ruins around them. "These stones have stories too, if you know how to listen. They remember the time before, when choice meant something more than profit." The word struck her like a physical blow. You know about the ceremony?" "The whole city knows, Star Lady. Hard to miss the parade of warships and the smell of greed in the air." Kael's expression grew sad. "They say the princess must choose a master tonight, or have one chosen for her. Seems like no choice at all." Lyra found herself laughing through her tears, harsh, bitter laughter that echoed off the ancient stones. "No choice at all," she repeated, "a perfect summary of royal life. Why do you laugh like that? It sounds like breaking glass." "Because," Lyra said, standing and beginning to pace among the ruins, "I am that princess. I am the Star Lady they're auctioning off to the highest bidder. And in less than an hour, I have to go back in there and smile while I surrender my life to a monster who collects wives like hunting trophies." Kael went very still. "You are Princess Lyra?" "I am." She turned to face him, her luminous gown making her glow like a fallen star among the shadowy ruins. "And you are the first creature in years to speak to me like I'm a person instead of a political asset." Something shifted in Kael's expression, surprise, recognition, and something deeper that made her breath catch. He rose slowly from his stone seat, and for a moment, despite his ragged clothes and scarred scales, he moved with an unconscious grace that spoke of nobility. "Your Highness," he said softly, "what if I told you that choice still exists, that there are still those who remember when love mattered more than alliances?" "I would say you're speaking fairy tales," Lyra replied. But her voice was gentler now. "Then let me tell you a fairy tale, Star Lady," Kael said, stepping closer. "Once upon a time there was a bond stronger than law, older than empires, a bond that couldn't be bought or sold or commanded, a bond that chose its own." Lyra found herself moving closer to him as well, drawn by something she couldn't name. "And how does this fairy tale end?" "That depends," Kael whispered, now close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes, "on whether the princess is brave enough to choose her own story." In that moment, surrounded by the ruins of an ancient kingdom, with the sounds of her own political funeral echoing from the distant palace, Princess Lyra made a choice that would shake the foundations of the galaxy. She kissed the beggar dragon. The moment Lyra's lips touched Kael's, the universe exploded into fire and starlight. Power surged through both of them like a cosmic storm, ancient energies that had slumbered for 3 millennia, suddenly roaring to life. Lyra gasped against Kael's mouth as silver flames erupted around them, her Zephyrian luminescence blazing brighter than it ever had before. The very air crackled with electricity, and the ancient ruins began to glow with symbols that had been dormant since the fall of the old kingdom. Kael staggered backward, his amber eyes wide with shock and something that might have been terror. His scarred scales began to shimmer, the dull patches brightening to reveal glimpses of deeper colors beneath. Midnight blue shot through with veins of gold, the true scales of ancient royalty. What did you do?" he whispered, staring at his hands as they began to change, becoming more elegant, more powerful. Lyra couldn't answer. She was drowning in sensations that weren't her own, memories that belonged to someone else flooding her consciousness like a tidal wave. She saw vast star cities ruled by magnificent dragons, felt the weight of crowns that commanded galaxies, experienced the crushing loneliness of the last of a dying race. "Kael," she gasped, reaching toward him instinctively. "What are you?" Before he could respond, the symbols carved into the ancient stones around them flared to brilliant life, and a voice that seemed to come from the ruins themselves spoke in the old tongue. "The bond is awakened. The last heir of the ancestral dragons has found his soulmate. Let the covenant be sealed in starfire and shadow." Lyra felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, a connection forming that went deeper than blood, stronger than gravity. She could feel Kael's heartbeat as clearly as her own, could sense his emotions like distant music, fear, wonder, and beneath it all a recognition so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "No," Kael said, backing away further. "No, this cannot be. I am nothing, princess. A beggar, a vagrant, a creature so low that even other dragons spit on me in the streets." "You're lying," Lyra said, stepping closer despite the energy still crackling between them. The bond between them was pulling her forward, making it physically painful to be apart from him. "Those memories I saw, those weren't the memories of a beggar." Kael's expression crumbled, ancient pain surfacing in his amber eyes. "They are memories of what I once was, before I lost everything, before I was forced to hide in the shadows of my own shame." The sound of approaching voices echoed from the direction of the palace, guards no doubt sent to retrieve the missing princess. Lyra could hear Chancellor Morvex's voice among them, tight with barely controlled panic. "Princess Lyra, Your Highness, where are you?" "They're coming," Lyra said urgently. "Kael, you have to tell me who you really are. This bond between us, I can feel it changing me, making me stronger." What did that voice mean about the last heir of the ancestral dragons? Kael closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they blazed with an inner fire that transformed his entire face. "My true name is Kael Drakmoor, last son of the Dragon Emperor Kael Drakmoor, heir to the eternal flame that once lit the stars. 3,000 years ago, my people ruled this galaxy in an age of honor and justice. We were hunted to extinction by those who feared our power and coveted our wealth." The approaching voices grew louder. Lyra could see torchlight beginning to flicker between the trees. "I am the last," Kael continued, his voice heavy with grief. "The final ember of a flame that once burned across countless worlds. For 3 millennia, I have hidden among the lesser dragons disguised as a vagrant, waiting to die and end the shame of my survival." "Your Highness!" The guards were getting closer. Lyra felt the bond between them singing in her blood, filling her with strength and purpose she had never known. "But you're not the last anymore," she said fiercely. "The bond, I can feel it. You're not alone. Princess, you don't understand what this means. The bond of an ancestral dragon cannot be broken. Not by distance, not by time, not even by death. You will be bound to me for eternity. And I," his voice broke, "I have nothing to offer you but exile and danger. The moment they discover what I am, every power in the galaxy will hunt us both." "Let them come," Lyra said, surprised by her own vehemence. "I would rather face eternity as a hunted exile than spend one more day as a pampered prisoner." The torchlight was visible through the ruins now. Chancellor Morvex's voice carried clearly in the night air. "Search every stone. The princess must be returned before the ceremony concludes." Kael's form began to shift, his true power stirring beneath the surface. For just a moment Lyra caught a glimpse of what he had once been, majestic beyond description, with scales that held the light of stars and wings that could shadow worlds. Then he forced himself back into his beggar's disguise, though the effort clearly cost him. "If you stay with me," he warned, "your life as you know it ends tonight. Your family, your people, your comfortable palace, all of it will be lost. The nobles in that ceremony hall will see our bond as an abomination, a betrayal of everything they believe in." "Good," Lyra said fiercely. "Let them rage, let them plot and scheme. I choose you, Kael Drakmoor. I choose freedom over safety, truth over comfort." The bond between them pulsed with shared determination, and Kael's expression shifted from despair to something that might have been hope. "Princess Lyra!" Chancellor Morvex's voice was very close now. "We can see the glow. She's in the ruins." "Then run with me," Kael said, extending his hand. "Choose exile over slavery, Star Lady. Choose the unknown over the unbearable." Lyra looked back once toward the palace, where her golden cage waited with its doors standing open. She thought of Prince Vorthak's predatory smile, of the nobles who saw her as breeding stock, of the life of quiet desperation that stretched ahead of her like a living death. Then she looked at Kael, at the last heir of an ancient nobility that had chosen extinction rather than surrender their honor. She took his hand. "Together," she whispered. "Together," he agreed. The silver flames around them flared higher as their bond settled into place, marking them both with power that would reshape their destinies. Behind them, the shouts of the guards grew frantic as they realized their princess had made a choice that would shake the foundations of the galactic order. The hunt was about to begin. The ceremonial hall erupted into chaos when Chancellor Morvex returned with news that would shatter galactic politics forever. "She's gone," he announced to the assembled nobles, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Princess Lyra has bonded herself to a dragon vagrant." The silence that followed was deafening. Prince Vorthak's massive frame went rigid, his scaled hands slowly curling into fists. The plutocrat from the mining guild dropped his golden goblet, the crystalline wine spreading across the floor like spilled blood. Prince Zerion's face twisted into an expression of such rage that several nearby guests stepped back in fear. "Impossible!" Vorthak rumbled, his voice like grinding mountains. "No royal would debase herself with gutter scum." The bond flames were visible from half a mile away, Morvex continued, wringing his hands. Ancient symbols blazed on the ruins. The old stones themselves bore witness. It cannot be undone." King Aldrich Vexhai, Lyra's father, rose slowly from his throne. His normally composed features had gone pale, and the crystalline crown on his brow flickered with distressed light. "Explain to me exactly what you saw, Chancellor." "Silver fire, Your Majesty, the kind described in the oldest texts. And the dragon. For a moment, just a moment, I could have sworn." Morvex swallowed hard. The beggar's disguise slipped. "What I saw beneath, it was no common vagrant." The implications hit the assembly like a psychic shockwave. Whispers rippled through the crowd, growing louder and more frantic with each passing second. Ancestral Dragon thought they were extinct, if one survived. The old treaties. Prince Zerion slammed his fist onto the nearest table, shattering the crystal surface. "I don't care if he's the ghost of the Dragon Emperor himself. The princess was promised to this assembly. Her betrayal invalidates every trade agreement, every military alliance. More than that," the mining guild plutocrat said coldly, "if word spreads that Zephyria has harbored an ancestral dragon in secret, every world in the galaxy will demand explanations. Some will call it an act of war." King Aldrich's advisors huddled around him, their urgent whispers filling the air with panic. The economic implications alone were staggering. Broken contracts, withdrawn investments, trade embargoes. But the political ramifications could tear the galaxy apart. "Your Majesty," Prince Vorthak stepped forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the throne. "Give me authority to hunt them down. I'll bring back your daughter and the dragon's head. The bond can be severed." "Ancestral dragon bonds cannot be severed," spoke a new voice from the back of the hall. Elder Corinth, the oldest member of the Royal Council, shuffled forward with the aid of his crystal-tipped staff. "I have studied the ancient texts. What has been awakened tonight is older than our civilizations, more binding than law itself." "Then what do you suggest, old man?" Zerion snarled. Corinth's ancient eyes were grave. "I suggest we prepare for war. If Kael Drakmoor truly lives, then the old prophecies may yet come to pass. The texts speak of a time when the last dragon would rise, when ancient powers would awaken to judge the new order we have built on the bones of the old." Meanwhile, miles away from the palace, Lyra and Kael moved through the whispering woods that bordered the capital city. Kael's knowledge of hidden paths and forgotten routes served them well. He had spent centuries learning to avoid detection, and now those skills were keeping them alive. "How long before they realize we've left the planet?" Lyra asked, her ceremonial gown transformed into practical traveling clothes by the residual magic of their bond. "They already know," Kael replied grimly. "I can feel the search nets spreading across the system. Your father has called in favors from every major military power. We have perhaps 6 hours before the hyperspace blockades go into effect. Lyra felt a pang of sorrow through their bond, not her own emotion, but Kael's. She looked at him more closely, noting how his shoulders had straightened, how his movement had become more fluid and purposeful. The beggar's mask was slipping away, revealing glimpses of the emperor he had once been. "You're changing," she observed. "The bond is restoring what I buried," Kael admitted. 3,000 years of hiding, of diminishing myself to survive. It's being burned away by the connection between us. I can feel my true power stirring, and it terrifies me. "Why?" Kael stopped walking and turned to face her, his amber eyes now clearly glowing with inner fire. "Because the last time I used my full power, I destroyed a solar system. The last time an ancestral dragon let his rage loose, entire civilizations burned. There is a reason the galaxy hunted us to extinction, Star Lady. We were too dangerous to live." The sound of approaching aircraft echoed through the forest, search patterns spreading out from the capital like ripples on a pond. Kael's head snapped up, his enhanced senses cataloguing threats. "Imperial Guard fighters," he said. "At least 30 vessels. They're scanning for energy signatures." "Can they detect us?" "They can detect me," Kael said grimly. "The bond has awakened energies I haven't used in millennia. I'm blazing like a beacon to anyone with the right sensors." He looked at her with an expression of infinite regret. "Lyra, it's not too late. You could return, claim you were bewitched or coerced. Your father would forgive you. The nobles would accept the explanation and—" "No," Lyra's voice cut through his words like a blade. "I told you my choice, Kael Drakmoor. I meant it." The bond between them pulsed with her determination, and Kael's expression shifted from despair to something that might have been reverence. "Then we run," he said simply. "And we hope that somewhere in this hostile galaxy we can find allies who remember that dragons once fought for justice, not conquest." Above them, the search craft grew closer. Searchlights began sweeping through the forest canopy, turning night into artificial day. Soon, very soon, they would be found. "Where can we go?" Lyra asked. "If the major powers are hunting us, where in the galaxy is safe?" Kael's smile was sharp and dangerous, the first expression of true draconic pride she had seen from him. "There are places, Star Lady, hidden worlds that remember the old ways. Refugee colonies that would welcome the return of ancient justice, pirates and rebels who have no love for the current order. And you know how to find these places?" "I am the last heir of the Dragon Empire," Kael said, his voice carrying new authority. "There are oaths sworn in Starfire that even 3 millennia cannot break. Some debts of honor survive even extinction." The aircraft were directly overhead now, their engines screaming as they descended toward the forest floor. Kael's form began to shift, his true power rising to meet the threat. "Hold on to me," he commanded, his voice deepening as his draconic nature asserted itself. "And prepare to see why they feared us." Lyra grasped his hand, just as the first energy blasts began tearing through the trees around them. In that moment, as death descended from the sky and the hunt began in earnest, she felt no fear. Only the fierce joy of a soul finally set free. The last Dragon Emperor was awakening, and the galaxy would never be the same. The transformation began slowly, then accelerated like a collapsing star. Kael's scarred beggar's form dissolved like smoke, revealing the magnificent creature he had been born to be. His scales shifted from dull brown to midnight blue, shot through with veins of pure gold, each one catching starlight and throwing it back transformed. His body expanded, growing from the size of a tall humanoid to something truly draconic, 20 feet of sinuous power crowned with horns that curved like crescent moons. Wings unfurled from his shoulders, not the tattered membranes of his disguise, but vast pinions that seemed to contain captured galaxies within their depths. But it was his eyes that truly marked him as what he was, ancient amber that held the weight of 3,000 years, burning with the fury of a race that had been hunted to extinction. "By all the void-touched stars," Lyra whispered, staring up at him in awe. Through their bond, she could feel the immense power coursing through his restored form, power that made the very air around them thrum with barely contained energy. The Imperial Guard fighters descended through the canopy like metal predators, their searchlights painting the forest floor in harsh white light. Energy cannons charged with distinctive whines, targeting systems locking onto the impossible energy signature that blazed from Kael's transformation. "Unknown entity, you are surrounded," came a voice through external speakers. "Surrender immediately or face destruction." Kael's laugh was like distant thunder, rich with dark humor. "Surrender," he rumbled, his voice now carrying harmonics that made the ancient trees sway. "Child, do you know what you're hunting?" The lead fighter opened fire without warning, crimson energy beams lancing down toward them with lethal precision. Kael moved with fluid grace that belied his size, one wing sweeping up to deflect the blasts. Where the energy touched his scales, it simply disappeared, absorbed and transformed into harmless light. "Impossible," came the shocked voice from the fighter. "Energy shields at maximum, all units concentrate fire." 30 Imperial Guard fighters opened fire simultaneously, turning the forest clearing into a hellscape of concentrated destruction. Trees vaporized, stone melted, and the very air screamed under the assault. When the barrage ended, a crater 50 feet wide marked where Kael and Lyra had been standing. "Target eliminated," reported the squadron leader. "No energy signatures detected." "Think again," came Kael's voice from directly above them. The fighters looked up just in time to see death descending from the stars. Kael hung in the night sky, his wings spread wide, completely untouched by their assault. In the depths of his throat, blue-white fire was building, not the crude flame of lesser dragons, but star fire that could burn through the hulls of battleships. "You hunt the last son of the Dragon Throne," Kael declared, his voice carrying across the entire forest. "You fire upon the heir to powers that lit the first suns. Did you think your toys could harm me?" He opened his mouth and breathed. The starfire that erupted was beautiful and terrible beyond description, not mere flame but the fundamental force that powered cosmic furnaces. It washed over the first fighter like a wave of liquid starlight, and the craft simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized, erased as if it had never been built at all. The remaining fighters scattered like startled birds, their pilots screaming orders into their communications arrays. "Command, this is Dragon Squadron. We need immediate reinforcement. The target is Command, we're facing an Ancestral Dragon." "Repeat, confirmed Ancestral Dragon." From the palace, the response crackled with barely controlled panic. "Impossible! They're extinct!" "Tell that to the 3 fighters," he. "Just erased," the squadron leader shouted back. "We need the orbital defense platforms online now." But Kael was no longer the broken creature who had hidden in alleys and begged for scraps. 3 millennia of suppressed power flowed through him like a river of liquid lightning, and with Lyra's bond anchoring him to hope instead of despair, he was becoming something the galaxy had forgotten could exist, a Dragon Emperor in the full fury of his wrath. He moved through the scattered fighters like a force of nature, each movement fluid and precise. Starfire consumed 2 more craft before their pilots could even attempt to evade. A sweep of his tail sent another tumbling from the sky. His roar shattered the sensors of a 4th, leaving its pilot flying blind into the trees. "Kael," Lyra called from below, and he descended to her immediately, his protective instincts overriding his battle fury. The orbital platforms, they're powering up. High above Zephyria's atmosphere, weapons that could crack continents were turning their attention toward the forest. Energy readings that defied comprehension were being analyzed by military computers that had never encountered anything like an ancestral dragon in full power. "They mean to glass the entire region," Kael said grimly, his enhanced senses reading the orbital signatures. 20-mile radius, nothing left alive. "Your own father would authorize that?" he asked gently. Lyra's expression was pained but determined. "To stop an ancestral dragon? To prevent galactic war? Yes, he would sacrifice me if he had to." Through their bond, Kael felt her anguish, but also her resolve. "We need to leave this world now. The hyperspace blockades—" "Won't matter," Lyra interrupted, "if you're truly what you claim to be. Ancestral dragons didn't need starships to travel between worlds." Kael stared at her, surprise flickering through their connection. "You've been studying the old texts." "My grandmother told me stories," Lyra said, "before the council forbade such tales. Dragons who could step between stars, who traveled on wings of pure energy across the cosmic void. If you are Kael Drakmoor, last heir to the Dragon Throne, then show me." Above them, the orbital platforms finished their charging cycles. Warning lights began flashing on every emergency frequency as the military prepared to turn a section of their own planet into radioactive glass. Kael felt the familiar terror rise in his chest, the fear that had kept him hidden for 3,000 years. The last time he had used his full power, the consequences had been catastrophic. Entire star systems had paid the price for his rage, but through their bond, he felt Lyra's absolute faith in him, not in his power, but in his character. She trusted him to be better than his fears, stronger than his guilt. "Hold tight to me, Star Lady," he said, gathering her into his arms as his wings began to glow with energies that predated galactic civilization. "And prepare to see how dragons once ruled the stars." The orbital bombardment began just as Kael launched himself skyward, his wings catching currents of pure cosmic force. The energy beams designed to sterilize continents passed harmlessly around them, as Kael tapped into powers that existed beyond the normal laws of physics. Space folded around them like origami made of starlight, and in a flash of impossible brilliance, they were gone, leaving behind only a crater where the forest had been and a galaxy that would soon learn that dragons were not extinct after all. The hunt that had begun in the ruins of the Old Kingdom was now spreading across the stars themselves, and at its heart flew the last hope of a noble race thought lost forever, bound to a princess who had chosen love over safety and freedom over the golden chains of political necessity. Behind them, alarms screamed across 100 worlds as the impossible became reality. The ancestral dragons had returned. They materialized in a cascade of starlight above a world that shouldn't have existed. Lyra gasped as consciousness returned to her, the disorienting effects of dragon flight leaving her momentarily breathless. She found herself cradled in Kael's arms as he descended through an atmosphere that shimmered with aurora-like patterns, not the harsh industrial skies of the core worlds, but something wild and untamed. "Where are we?" she whispered, staring down at a landscape that seemed lifted from ancient fairy tales. Crystalline forests stretched to the horizon, their translucent trees singing in harmonies that resonated in her bones. Rivers of liquid silver wound between hills covered in flowers that glowed with their own inner light. In the distance, she could see structures that defied conventional architecture, spires that twisted like DNA helixes, bridges that appeared to be made of solidified rainbow light, and towers that seemed to grow rather than be built. "Sanctuary," Kael replied, his voice filled with an emotion she couldn't identify through their bond. "The hidden world of Ethermoor, last refuge of those who remember the old ways." As they descended, figures began emerging from the crystal forests and luminous gardens. At first glance, Lyra thought they were approaching a gathering of various alien species, but as they drew closer, she realized the truth was far more remarkable. These were all dragons, but not the broken, desperate creatures she had occasionally seen in the urban centers of the galaxy. These dragons moved with dignity, their scales bright and unmarked by the scars of oppression. "Impossible," she breathed. "The records say there are fewer than 10,000 dragons left in the entire galaxy, scattered and enslaved." "The records," Kael said with bitter irony, "were written by those who hunted us. They never knew about Ethermoor." They landed in what appeared to be a town square, though unlike anything in Lyra's experience. The ground beneath their feet was made of some crystalline substance that captured and reflected light in impossible ways, creating the illusion of walking on trapped stars. Buildings rose around them in organic curves, their walls seeming to breathe with slow, steady rhythms. The assembled dragons regarded them with a mixture of awe, fear, and desperate hope. Lyra could see representatives of species she had only read about in extinct biological surveys: ember dragons, whose scales flickered like living fire; frost dragons, whose breath created intricate ice sculptures in the air; shadow dragons, whose forms seemed to blur at the edges of perception. An ancient female dragon approached them, her scales the deep green of old forests, and her eyes holding the weight of centuries. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of unquestionable leadership. "Kael Drakmoor," she said, and the name rippled through the assembled crowd like a shockwave. "We felt the awakening across half the galaxy. The star songs themselves sang of your return to power." Kael transformed back to his humanoid form, though he retained his true scales and noble bearing. "Elder Thysia," he said, inclining his head with deep respect, "I didn't think you would still be alive." "I have waited 3,000 years for this moment," Thysia replied. "We all have. When the massacres began, when our race was driven to near extinction, the survivors who found their way here swore an oath that Ethermoor would endure until the last heir returned." Lyra felt suddenly small and out of place among these magnificent beings. She was alien to their world, bonded to their lost prince, but carrying no dragon blood in her veins. Through their connection, she felt Kael sense her discomfort and squeeze her hand gently. "This is Princess Lyra Vexhai," Kael announced to the gathering. "My bonded mate, chosen by the ancient laws themselves." The reaction was immediate and mixed. Some dragons bowed respectfully, acknowledging the sacred nature of the bond. Others muttered in what sounded like disapproval, not of Lyra herself, but of the complications her presence would bring. "The galaxy burns with news of your awakening," Thysia said gravely. "Every military force is mobilizing. The Galactic Council has declared a state of emergency. They're calling it the Dragon Crisis." "Let them panic," snarled a younger dragon whose scales gleamed like polished copper. "For 3 millennia we've hidden in shadows while they built their empires on our bones. Now they remember why they feared us." "Speak carefully, Pyrian," Thysia warned. "Fear and rage are what led to the Great Purge. If we respond to their mobilization with violence, we'll only prove their propaganda correct, that dragons are monsters who deserve extinction." Kael stepped forward, his presence commanding attention from every dragon in the square. "Elder Thysia speaks wisdom, but we cannot ignore reality. The galaxy will not allow me to exist peacefully. Already they're forming hunting fleets. By tomorrow there will be bounties on both our heads that could fund private armies." "Then what do you propose, my prince?" Thysia asked. "I propose we stop hiding," Kael said, his voice carrying the authority of his bloodline. "For 3,000 years we've survived by making ourselves small, by accepting the scraps they threw us, by pretending our heritage meant nothing. But survival isn't living." He gestured to the assembled dragons around them. "Look at what we've built here. A civilization that honors life instead of exploiting it. Technology that enhances rather than destroys. Art that uplifts the spirit rather than deadening it. The galaxy needs to see what we are, not what their propaganda claims we are." "And if they respond with force?" Pyrian demanded. Kael's eyes blazed with controlled fire. "Then they'll discover that this last heir of the Dragon Throne remembers how to fight for more than just survival." Meanwhile, across the galaxy, emergency sessions were being called in every major government center. The footage from Zephyria had spread like wildfire, enhanced security recordings showing an ancestral dragon in full power, casually destroying military aircraft and vanishing into hyperspace without a ship. In the Imperial Senate on Centauri Prime, War Marshal Brutix addressed a chamber full of terrified politicians. "The energy readings from Zephyria exceeded anything in our databases. If more ancestral dragons exist, if they've been hiding and breeding in secret, the balance of galactic power could shift overnight." "How many more could there be?" demanded Senator Vex, her purple skin pale with fear. "Unknown. Our intelligence suggested the species was functionally extinct, scattered individuals with no organization or leadership, but this sanctuary they fled to, if it's real, it could house thousands." On the military world of Terminus 7th, Prince Vorthak addressed his assembled war fleet. "The princess who rejected me has bonded with an abomination that should have been exterminated millennia ago. This is not just personal dishonor, it's a threat to the natural order itself. Dragons are too powerful to exist in a civilized galaxy." His scarred face twisted with hatred as he stared at the tactical displays showing projected dragon strongholds. "Find them, all of them, and remind the galaxy why the Great Purge was necessary." Back on Ethermore, Lyra stood with Kael on a crystal balcony overlooking the impossible city. The bond between them hummed with shared emotions, his determination mixing with her lingering fear of what they had set in motion. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Giving up your disguise, revealing what you are?" Kael considered the question seriously before answering. "For 3,000 years, I've lived as a shadow of what I was born to be, hiding, diminishing myself, accepting shame for crimes I never committed. The bond with you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever, a reason to remember my own worth." He turned to face her, his amber eyes soft with affection. "You asked me once what choice meant. Tonight, I choose to be what I was born to be, regardless of the consequences. For the first time in millennia, I choose to live instead of merely survive." Above them, the stars wheeled in their courses, and among them moved the engines of war as a galaxy prepared for the return of its most ancient nightmare, unaware that within that nightmare lived the seeds of a justice they had forgotten how to imagine. The dragon had awakened, and with him, the possibility of a better world. 3 days after their arrival on Ethermore, Lyra found herself standing in the Hall of Memory, a vast crystal chamber where the complete history of the Dragon Empire was preserved in living light. Holographic displays showed the glory that once was. Star cities ruled by benevolent dragon lords, trade networks that spanned galaxies, and most importantly, a time when power served justice rather than profit. "Your people weren't conquerors," she said in wonder. watching scenes of dragons working alongside dozens of alien species in perfect harmony. The propaganda was all lies. Not all lies, Kael corrected sadly, materializing beside her in the way dragons could when moving through their own domains. We were powerful, and power can corrupt even the most noble intentions, but we tried to be better than our strength allowed us to be. Elder Thysia's voice echoed through the chamber as she approached, her ancient form moving with dignified grace. Princess Lyra, I'm glad you've come here. If you're to be bonded to our lost prince, you should understand what he carries. The displays shifted, showing darker scenes, the first attacks on dragon colonies, propaganda campaigns depicting them as monsters, the systematic hunting that followed. The younger races feared us, Thysia explained, not without reason. A single ancestral dragon in full fury could devastate entire systems, but fear became hatred, and hatred became genocide. Why didn't you fight back? Lyra asked, with power like Kael showed on Zephyria. Because we tried that. Kael's voice was heavy with guilt. 3,000 years ago, when the massacres began, I led the last great offensive against our enemies. Do you want to see what my rage accomplished? The displays changed to show a solar system. 7 worlds, 3 inhabited, all thriving with billions of lives. Then came the battle footage. A younger Kael, mad with grief over his slaughtered family, channeling the full fury of his ancestral power. What followed was beyond devastation. It was cosmic-scale destruction that turned planets to ash and extinguished suns. 4 billion sentient beings, Kael whispered, dead because I couldn't control my anger. That was the day I understood why they hunted us. That was the day I chose exile over continued atrocities. Lyra felt his anguish through their bond, the crushing weight of guilt that had driven him into 3 millennia of self-imposed poverty. But she also felt something else, a deep well of wisdom earned through suffering. You were young and in pain, she said gently. That doesn't excuse what happened, but it explains it. What matters is what you choose to do now. Before Kael could respond, alarms began ringing throughout Ethermoor. The crystal displays shifted to show space above the planet's atmosphere, dozens of massive warships dropping out of hyperspace, their hulls bearing the insignia of the Galactic Alliance military. Pirion burst into the chamber, his copper scales gleaming with battle readiness. My prince, they've found us. Admiral Korath's 3rd Fleet, 50 dreadnoughts and twice as many support vessels. Elder Thysia moved to a communication crystal that began projecting a holographic image of the fleet's commander, Admiral Korath himself, his reptilian features twisted with professional determination. Inhabitants of the rogue world designated Ethermoor, came his amplified voice, you are in violation of the Emergency Dragon Containment Act, passed by emergency session of the Galactic Council. Surrender the fugitives Kael Drakmoor and Princess Lyra Vexhai immediately, and your colony will be relocated to supervised containment facilities. And if we refuse, Elder Thysia asked calmly, then this system will be sterilized in accordance with Protocol 7. You have 1 hour to comply. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in tense silence. Through the crystal walls, Lyra could see dragons throughout the city looking skyward with expressions of fear and defiance. Protocol 7, Kael said grimly. Complete planetary bombardment. They mean to finish what they started 3,000 years ago. Let them come, Pirion snarled, flames leaking from between his teeth. We have over 8,000 dragons on this world, warriors who've trained for this moment their entire lives. Let them see what real power looks like. No, Kael's voice cut through the growing battle fury like a blade. I will not be responsible for another massacre. I'll surrender myself if it means protecting Ethermoor. You will not, Lyra said fiercely, surprising everyone including herself with her vehemence. I didn't choose exile and bonding just to watch you sacrifice yourself to appease the same forces that hunted your people to near extinction. Elder Thysia studied the tactical displays showing the fleet positions. There may be another option. Princess, your father's ships are notably absent from this fleet. The Zephyrian delegation has not joined the alliance against us. Father wouldn't, Lyra realized. Whatever his anger at my choice, he wouldn't authorize military action against his own daughter. She turned to Kael. Can you reach him? Dragon flight across interstellar distances? The energy expenditure would be enormous, and I'd be vulnerable during the journey. But yes, it's possible. Then that's what we do, Lyra decided. While you're gone, I'll address the fleet. As a princess of a sovereign world, I have diplomatic immunity. They can't simply blast me out of space without causing a major political incident. Absolutely not, Kael said immediately. I won't leave you defenseless against— I won't be defenseless, Lyra interrupted, her hand going to the crystal pendant at her throat, a gift from Elder Thesia that contained a fragment of bonded dragon fire. Through our connection, I carry part of your power. And more importantly, I carry legitimacy they can't ignore. The bond between them pulsed with shared emotion, his desperate desire to protect her warring with his recognition that her plan might actually work. The galaxy respects power and profit above all else, Lyra continued, but they still remember the old diplomatic protocols. Let me remind them that some laws are older than their hatred. Elder Thesia nodded approvingly. The princess speaks wisdom, but we should prepare for the possibility that diplomacy fails. Pyrian, begin evacuation procedures for the younglings and elders. If this world burns, let it not be said we didn't preserve our future. Kael pulled Lyra aside, his hands gentle on her shoulders. If I leave you here, you're not leaving me, she said firmly. You're trusting me to do my part while you do yours. That's what partnership means. Through their bond, she felt his love for her blazing like a star, fierce, protective, and absolute. But underneath it, she also felt his trust, the recognition that she was no longer the sheltered princess who had fled her mating ceremony, but a woman who had chosen her own destiny and would fight to protect it. Together, she whispered, echoing their vow from the ruins. Together, he agreed, his form beginning to shift as he prepared for the desperate flight to Zephyria. Above them, Admiral Korath's fleet moved into bombardment positions, their weapons charging with the power to crack continents. In 57 minutes, those weapons would fire unless the dragons surrendered. But in the Hall of Memory, surrounded by holographic reminders of an empire built on justice rather than fear, Princess Lyra Vexhai prepared to do something that might change the course of galactic history. She prepared to remind the universe what true nobility looked like. The young woman who had once been nothing more than a political prize was about to become a voice that could speak for all the oppressed peoples of the galaxy. And in the space between worlds, the last Dragon Emperor raced against time to prevent another genocide, powered not by rage this time but by love. Princess Lyra Vexhai stood alone in the communication chamber of Ethermore's central spire, facing a holographic display that showed 57 warships pointed at her adopted home like a constellation of death. In her hand, she held the diplomatic seal that marked her as a sovereign representative, a small crystal that held more legal authority than most people would ever wield in their lifetimes. Admiral Korath, she said, her voice carrying across the void between world and fleet. I am Princess Lyra Vexhai of the Zephyrian Royal House. Under the Galactic Convention of Sovereign Rights, I demand to address your fleet before any hostile action is taken. The response came after a long pause. Admiral Korath's reptilian features twisted with barely controlled impatience. Princess Lyra, you are a fugitive from galactic justice. Your diplomatic status was revoked the moment you bonded with the dragon terrorist. Terrorist? Lyra's laugh was sharp and dangerous. Admiral, I've studied the records of the so-called Dragon Purge. Tell me exactly what terrorist acts did Kael Drakmoor commit before your predecessors hunted his people to near extinction? The dragons were a threat to galactic stability. The dragons were competition for galactic resources, Lyra interrupted, her voice carrying the authority she'd learned in years of diplomatic training. They controlled the most lucrative trade routes, commanded loyalty from dozens of species, and worst of all, from your perspective, they couldn't be bought, corrupted, or intimidated into submission. Throughout the fleet, she could see communication officers frantically working their controls. Her words were being broadcast on open channels, reaching not just the military personnel, but the civilian populations of a dozen worlds. The political implications were staggering. Princess, Korath said carefully, you're broadcasting seditious propaganda. I'm broadcasting historical fact, Lyra said coldly. Admiral, your own military archives contain records of the pre-purge era. Dragon worlds had the lowest crime rates, the most equitable resource distribution, and the strongest protections for individual rights in the galaxy. They were eliminated not because they were evil, but because they were good. On the bridge of the flagship Inexorable, Captain Vextar leaned over to Admiral Korath. Sir, civilian populations on 6 worlds are requesting clarification of her claims. The political officers are recommending we cut transmission. Absolutely not, Korath replied grimly. The moment we censor a sovereign princess, we validate everything she's saying about authoritarian overreach. Meanwhile, light years away, Kael materialized in the royal palace of Zephyria in a cascade of starfire that set off every security system in the complex. Guards rushed toward the throne room with weapons drawn, only to find themselves face to face with something their training had never prepared them to handle. King Aldrich Vexhai sat upon his crystalline throne, his expression unreadable as he studied the being who had stolen his daughter. "So," he said quietly, "the beggar reveals his true face." "Your Majesty," Kael said, executing a perfect formal bow, not the servile groveling of a vagrant, but the respectful greeting of one sovereign to another. "I come to you not as a beggar, but as Kael Drakmoor, last heir of the dragon throne, seeking audience with the father of my bonded mate." "The father," Aldrich said coldly, "whose daughter you corrupted and kidnapped." "The father whose daughter chose freedom over slavery," Kael corrected gently. "Your Majesty, I understand your anger, but right now, Admiral Korath's fleet is preparing to commit genocide against 8,000 innocent dragons. Lyra is standing alone against 57 warships, armed with nothing but diplomatic protocol and courage." King Aldrich's composure cracked slightly. She's facing them alone?" "She insisted," Kael said, and despite everything there was pride in his voice. "Your daughter has become remarkable, Your Majesty. She's fighting not just for our bond, but for the idea that justice still means something in this galaxy." Back on Ethermore, Lyra was pressing her advantage, her words reaching audiences across dozens of star systems. "Admiral, let me ask you something personal. Do you have children?" Korath's expression flickered with surprise. Yes, 2 daughters. And if someone told you that your daughters were genetically predisposed to violence, that their entire species needed to be eliminated for the greater good, how would you respond?" "That's different." "No, it's not," Lyra said fiercely. "It's exactly the same logic that justified the Dragon Purge. Collective punishment based on species, genetic determinism used to justify genocide, fear of competition disguised as concern for public safety." Throughout the fleet, she could see crew members turning to look at their officers with new questions in their eyes. The power of her words was spreading like ripples through water, forcing individuals to confront comfortable assumptions. "The dragon beside me," Lyra continued, gesturing to where Pyrion stood in his full magnificent form, "has never committed a crime against any sentient being. He's a teacher, Admiral. He educates dragon children in mathematics and stellar navigation. Yet your orders classify him as a terrorist who must be eliminated. The Galactic Council meets in chambers built from the bones of dragon cities," Lyra snapped. "They write laws on platforms made from melted dragon artifacts. They've built their entire civilization on the foundation of an ancient crime, and now they're terrified that someone might demand they account for it." In the royal palace of Zephyria, King Aldrich was watching his daughter's broadcast with growing amazement. "She's magnificent," he whispered. "She always was," Kael said quietly. "You raised a daughter who values justice over comfort, truth over political convenience. Right now she's risking her life to prevent another genocide." Aldrich turned to face him fully for the first time. "And what are you risking, Dragon Prince?" "Everything," Kael replied simply. "My people, my power, my life, all of it is secondary to her safety. But she won't let me simply surrender to save her. She believes we can find a better way." "And do you believe that?" Kael was quiet for a long moment. "Your Majesty, 3,000 years ago I destroyed an entire solar system in my rage and grief. I've spent every day since then believing that I was too dangerous to live, too broken to be redeemed. But your daughter looked at me and saw not a monster, but a person worth saving." He met the king's eyes directly. "She believes in redemption, in the possibility that even the most damaged souls can choose to be better. If she's wrong, then the galaxy deserves to burn for what it's become, but if she's right, Aldrich finished slowly, then perhaps it's worth fighting for." On the flagship Inexorable, Admiral Korath was receiving increasingly urgent messages from political leaders across the galaxy. Princess Lyra's broadcast was having effects no one had anticipated. Civilian populations were demanding explanations. Historians were speaking publicly about suppressed records. And most dangerously, dragon communities on dozens of worlds were emerging from hiding for the first time in centuries. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving transmission requests from the Zephyrian royal fleet." Korath's blood went cold. "King Aldrich?" "Yes, sir. And, sir, they're not joining our blockade. They're positioning to defend Ethermore." The balance of power in the galaxy was shifting, with every word Princess Lyra spoke, every moment that passed without the expected surrender. What had begun as a simple hunting expedition was becoming a confrontation that could reshape civilizations, and at the center of it all stood a young woman who had chosen love over safety, armed with nothing but truth and the unshakable belief that even in a galaxy built on fear, justice still mattered. The countdown to destruction continued, but for the first time in 3,000 years, hope was fighting back. Admiral Korath, Princess Lyra's voice rang across the void, reaching not just the military fleet but civilian populations across a dozen star systems. I have a proposition for you. The Admiral's reptilian features twisted with suspicion. What kind of proposition? Single combat, Lyra said, her words causing shocked silence across both the fleet and Ethermoor. You claim dragons are too dangerous to exist. I claim they're the victims of systematic genocide. Let the ancient laws of trial by combat settle this dispute. Princess, Elder Thisia whispered urgently, what are you doing? But Lyra pressed on, her diplomatic training serving her well. Under the old galactic accords, which have never been formally repealed, matters of species survival can be decided by champion combat. If your champion wins, the dragons of Ethermoor surrender themselves to your custody. If our champion wins, you withdraw your forces and agree to formal peace negotiations. Admiral Korath was silent for several long moments, no doubt consulting with his political advisors. The proposition was dangerous for both sides, but it also offered him something he desperately needed, a way to avoid the political disaster that bombing a sovereign princess would create. And who would serve as your champion? He asked finally. I will, came Kael's voice as he materialized beside Lyra in a cascade of starfire, having just returned from his desperate flight to Zephyria. Through their bond, she felt his mixture of terror at her bold gambit and fierce pride in her courage. Kael Drakmoor himself, Lyra announced to the fleet, last heir of the dragon throne, willing to stake everything on single combat rather than see innocent blood spilled. But Korath shook his head. Unacceptable. An ancestral dragon in full power. No single warrior in my fleet could match him. The combat would be meaningless. Then choose your terms, Kael said, stepping forward. Limit my power. Bind my abilities. Set whatever conditions you require. I'll accept them all. Kael, no, Lyra whispered, but he squeezed her hand gently. Trust me, Star Lady, he murmured. Some battles can only be won by losing everything. Admiral Korath's eyes gleamed with sudden opportunity. Very well. Combat will be fought in human form, with no dragon abilities, using only conventional weapons. Your champion against mine, General Thrakus of the Siege Corps. Even across the vast distance, Lyra could see the massive figure of General Thrakus on the fleet's bridge, 8 feet of scarred military muscle, a veteran of 100 campaigns who had never lost a single combat. The general was legendary throughout the galaxy for his skill with both blade and blaster, feared even by his own troops. Accepted, Kael said without hesitation. The combat will take place on neutral ground, Korath continued. The asteroid field between Ethermoor and my fleet. No interference from either side. Winner takes all. As preparations began for the transfer to the asteroid field, Lyra pulled Kael aside, her fear blazing through their bond like cold fire. You can't do this, she said urgently. General Thrakus has killed hundreds of opponents. You've spent 3,000 years as a beggar. When did you last fight as a human? The night I destroyed the Kepler system, Kael replied grimly. The night I learned that raw power without wisdom is just another form of tyranny. But, Lyra, he said gently, cupping her face in his hands, do you remember what you told me in the ruins? That fairy tales end when the princess is brave enough to choose her own story. She nodded, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. This is your story, Star Lady. You've shown the galaxy what true nobility looks like, not power used for domination, but courage used for protection. Win or lose, you've already changed everything. An hour later, on a barren asteroid spinning slowly between 2 fleets, the fate of an entire species was placed in the hands of 2 warriors. General Thrakus stood in full battle armor, multiple weapons gleaming at his belt, every inch the professional killer. Across from him, Kael appeared almost fragile in comparison, tall and lean in simple clothing carrying only a single blade. But Lyra, watching from Ethermoor's observation deck, could see what others might miss. Kael moved with the unconscious grace of someone who had trained with weapons for literally thousands of years. His stance was perfect, his balance absolute, and his eyes held the calm certainty of someone who had accepted all possible outcomes. "Begin!" Admiral Korath's voice echoed across the asteroid. General Thrakus attacked immediately, his massive blade sweeping toward Kael's neck with killing force. But where Thrakus used brute strength, Kael employed precision, deflecting rather than blocking, redirecting force instead of meeting it head-on. Within moments, it became clear that this was not going to be the quick execution Korath had expected. "Impossible," breathed Captain Vextar on the flagship bridge. "The dragon is fighting like he's done this for centuries." "He has," Admiral Korath realized grimly. "We're not watching a beggar pretending to be a warrior. We're watching what a dragon emperor looks like when stripped of everything except skill." The combat raged across the asteroid's surface, two masters of violence displaying their arts for an audience of two fleets. Thrakus was powerful and experienced, but Kael was something else entirely. He was ancient wisdom made manifest, fighting not with rage or desperation, but with the calm precision of absolute certainty. But as the battle continued, it became clear that Kael was holding back. Several times he had opportunities to deliver killing strikes, and each time he chose restraint instead. "Finish him!" Pyrion roared from Ethermoor. "End this!" But Lyra understood. "He's not fighting to kill," she whispered. "He's fighting to prove a point." Indeed, as the combat wore on, something remarkable began to happen. General Thrakus, exhausted and bleeding from a dozen minor wounds, began to slow. But instead of pressing his advantage, Kael began to speak. "General," he said, effortlessly avoiding another attack, "how many dragons have you killed in your career?" "Dozens," Thrakus panted, swinging wildly. "And how many of them attacked you first?" The question hung in the air as Thrakus stumbled, his massive frame finally succumbing to exhaustion. They were orders. Orders based on what evidence?" Kael pressed, still moving with fluid grace despite the long battle. "What crimes did those dragons commit to deserve death?" We were told." Thrakus's blade dropped slightly. "You were told lies, General, just as your troops are being told lies right now." Kael gestured toward the watching fleets. "Look around you. I could have killed you 20 times in this fight, but I haven't. Does that seem like the action of a monster?" General Thrakus, warrior of 100 battles, stopped fighting entirely. His blade fell from nerveless fingers as the implications of Kael's words sank in. "Surrender," he whispered. I surrender." The words echoed across both fleets, carried by open communication channels to populations throughout the galaxy. General Thrakus, the most feared warrior in the galactic military, had surrendered not to superior force, but to superior wisdom. "Admiral Korath," Kael called across the void, "do you accept your champion's surrender?" But before Korath could answer, new ships began dropping out of hyperspace around Ethermoor, the elegant vessels of the Zephyrian royal fleet, their hulls gleaming with peaceful intent. King Aldric's voice reached both fleets. "This is King Aldric Vexhai of Zephyria. By ancient law and common decency, I claim sanctuary for the dragons of Ethermoor under Zephyrian protection." The balance of power had shifted dramatically. What had begun as a hunting expedition had become a diplomatic crisis that could reshape the galaxy's entire understanding of justice and honor. And at the center of it all, Princess Lyra Vexhai smiled through her tears as she watched her bonded mate prove that true strength lay not in the power to destroy, but in the wisdom to choose mercy. The silence that followed General Thrakus's surrender stretched across space like a held breath. Two fleets hung motionless in the void, one representing the old order that had ruled through fear and oppression, the other offering protection to those who had been hunted for millennia. Admiral Korath stood on his flagship's bridge, his reptilian features twisted with conflicting emotions. Around him, his officers waited for orders that seemed impossible to give. The terms of the combat had been clear. If the Dragon Champion won, his forces would withdraw and agree to peace negotiations. But accepting defeat meant acknowledging 3,000 years of lies. "Sir," Captain Vextar whispered urgently, "we're receiving communications from the Galactic Council. They're demanding an explanation for why General Thrakus surrendered to an inferior opponent." "Inferior?" Korath laughed bitterly. "Did you watch the same combat I did? That beggar could have killed our best warrior with either hand tied behind his back. He chose mercy instead." The implications were staggering. If dragons possessed such restraint, such wisdom, then every justification for the Great Purge crumbled to dust. On Ethermoor, Kael materialized beside Lyra in the observation chamber, his human form bearing the minor wounds of combat, but his eyes blazing with something far more significant: Hope. You did it, Lyra breathed, throwing her arms around him. You actually did it. We did it, Kael corrected gently. Your diplomacy gave me the platform. All I did was demonstrate what you've been trying to tell them, that dragons are people, not monsters. Elder Thesia approached them, her ancient features showing more animation than they had in centuries. Young prince, do you understand what you've accomplished? General Thrakus's surrender is being broadcast across 50 star systems. Military personnel throughout the galaxy are questioning their orders. Indeed, the effects were spreading like ripples through hyperspace. On military worlds, dragon hunting units were standing down as their commanders grappled with new uncertainties. In civilian populations, suppressed questions about the official histories were surfacing with explosive force, but not everyone was ready to accept the new reality. Prince Vorthak's voice cut across the communication channels like a blade. Admiral Korath, under Emergency Military Protocol 77, I am assuming command of this operation. New ships were dropping out of hyperspace, the black-hulled vessels of Vorthak's personal war fleet, bristling with weapons and carrying the banners of the siege armada. The Galactic Council has authorized me to clean up this diplomatic disaster, Vorthak continued, his scarred face appearing on screens throughout both fleets. The dragon terrorist and the traitorous princess will be captured or killed. There will be no further negotiations with abominations. King Aldrich's voice immediately responded, Prince Vorthak, you are targeting a sovereign princess under the protection of the Zephyrian crown. Any hostile action will be considered an act of war. Then so be it, Vorthak snarled. Some prices are worth paying to preserve galactic order. The space around Ethermoor suddenly became a powder keg. 3 separate fleets faced each other, with weapons charged. Korath's forces caught between conflicting orders, Vorthak's war fleet ready for violence, and the Zephyrian Royal Navy prepared to defend their princess and her chosen people. He's going to start a shooting war, Lyra realized, her face pale with horror. Vorthak doesn't care about the political consequences. He wants to provoke a battle that will justify genocide. Kael's expression hardened as he studied the tactical displays. Then we need to remove him from the equation before he can start one. How? His fleet outguns everyone else combined. Not his fleet, Kael said quietly. Him personally. Vorthak built his entire reputation on personal combat prowess. If I challenge him to single combat, his pride won't let him refuse. Absolutely not, Lyra said fiercely. You just fought General Thrakus. You're wounded, exhausted, and Vorthak is a sadistic psychopath who spent decades perfecting ways to cause maximum suffering. Kael interrupted gently. Star Lady, I know the odds better than anyone. Through their bond, Lyra felt his calm certainty, not confidence in victory, but acceptance of necessity. He was prepared to die if it meant preventing a war that could consume the galaxy. There has to be another way, she insisted. Perhaps there is, came a new voice from the communication array. General Thrakus appeared on screen, but he was no longer on Korath's flagship. Instead, he seemed to be broadcasting from a small shuttle. Prince Vorthak, Thrakus said, his massive frame filling the display, I formally challenge your authority to command this operation. You dare? Vorthak's face twisted with rage. You lost to a dragon beggar. Your opinion is worthless. I didn't lose, Thrakus said calmly. I learned. In 30 years of military service, I've killed hundreds of beings because I was ordered to. I never once asked if those orders were just. Today, a dragon showed me what honor actually looks like. Throughout Admiral Korath's fleet, murmurs of agreement began spreading. Thrakus was respected by his troops in ways that Vorthak never could be. He was a warrior who led from the front, who shared their dangers and their hardships. General, Admiral Korath's voice cut through the transmissions. What are you proposing? I'm proposing we honor the terms of combat, Thrakus replied. The Dragon Champion won. We withdraw and negotiate, as agreed. Prince Vorthak's arrival doesn't change the fact that we gave our word. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. 3 fleets, representing 3 different philosophies of power, faced each other in the dark between worlds. The decision made in the next few minutes would determine whether the galaxy moved toward justice or descended into the kind of war that could shatter civilizations. On Ethermoor, dragons who had hidden in shame for 3 millennia stood watching their fate being decided by others. But for the first time in centuries, they were not alone. A princess had chosen to stand with them. A king had offered them sanctuary, and soldiers were beginning to question the lies they'd been told. Admiral Korath, King Aldrich's voice was formal but firm. Zephyria formally requests that you honor the terms of your combat agreement. We pledge full diplomatic support for any peace negotiations that follow. Admiral Korath looked around his bridge at officers who had served with him for decades. He saw doubt in their eyes, not in his leadership but in the propaganda that had shaped their entire careers. Prince Vorthak, he said finally, I am withdrawing my forces from this system. The terms of combat will be honored. You're making a mistake that will cost you your career, Vorthak raged. Perhaps, Korath replied calmly, but I'd rather lose my career than my honor. One by one, the ships of the Third Fleet began moving away from Ethermoor, their weapons powering down in a display of peaceful intent. It was not a complete victory. Vorthak's war fleet remained, and the political situation was far from resolved, but it was a beginning. For the first time in 3,000 years, dragons had allies among the stars. And in the crystal chambers of Ethermoor, Princess Lyra held her bonded mate close as they watched the first dawn of a new age, an age where love had proven stronger than hate, wisdom more powerful than violence, and hope more enduring than fear. The war for the soul of the galaxy was far from over, but the tide was finally beginning to turn. Prince Vorthak's war fleet hung like a malignant constellation above Ethermoor, their weapons charged and ready to rain destruction on the dragon sanctuary below. Unlike Admiral Korath's professional military vessels, these were ships built for one purpose: the complete annihilation of anything their commander deemed unworthy of existence. Citizens of Ethermoor, Vorthak's voice boomed across all frequencies, you have exactly 10 minutes to surrender the dragon terrorist and the traitorous princess. After that, I will demonstrate why the Great Purge was necessary. On the crystal-spired world below, 8,000 dragons looked skyward with expressions ranging from defiance to despair. Many of them were elders who remembered the original massacres, younglings who had grown up in hiding, and families who had never known a life without fear. But Elder Thysia stood unmoved in the central square, her ancient voice carrying to every dragon on the planet. My children, for 3,000 years we have cowered in shadows, diminished ourselves to survive, accepted shame for crimes we never committed. Today, we stand in the light of truth. Whatever comes, let it be said that we faced our end with dignity. In the palace's communication chamber, Lyra watched the tactical displays with growing desperation. The Zephyrian royal fleet was outnumbered 3-1, and while her father's ships were well armed, they were exploration and trade vessels, not warships designed for sustained combat. There has to be something we can do, she said, her hands clenched into fists. Some diplomatic solution, There is, Kael interrupted quietly. He stood by the great window, his human form silhouetted against the crystal spires of the city, but his presence had changed. The last vestiges of the broken beggar were gone, replaced by something that radiated ancient authority. I can give Vorthak what he's always wanted. What do you mean? Kael turned to face her, and for the first time since their bonding, Lyra felt genuine fear through their connection, not of death, but of what he was about to become. A dragon monster worthy of his hatred, Kael said simply. For 3,000 years I've held my true power in check, terrified of repeating the mistake that destroyed the Kepler system. But Vorthak won't be satisfied with anything less than total war. So I'll give him a war, and end it before it can spread. No, Lyra said fiercely, grabbing his arm. You're not that person anymore. You've proven you can choose mercy over vengeance, wisdom over power. Don't let him turn you back into the monster you think you were. Through their bond, she felt the crushing weight of his internal struggle. The power of an ancestral dragon in full fury could indeed destroy Vorthak's entire fleet, but it would also validate every lie that had been told about his people, confirm every propaganda claim about dragon savagery. Then what do you suggest? He asked gently. Because in 7 minutes he's going to start killing innocent dragons, and I won't watch that happen again. Before Lyra could answer, new contacts began appearing on the tactical displays, ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. But these weren't military vessels. Civilian transports, reported Pyrion from the sensor station, his voice filled with amazement. Hundreds of them, and they're broadcasting messages of support. Indeed, the communication channels were suddenly flooded with voices from across the galaxy. This is Captain Morale of the merchant vessel Starwind. We stand with Ethermoor. Independent freighter Cosmic Dancer here. We've seen the broadcasts. Dragons aren't the monsters, you are, Vorthak. Medical ship Mercy's call requesting permission to provide humanitarian aid to Ethermoor's population. More and more civilian vessels appeared, their crews motivated by Princess Lyra's diplomatic broadcasts and the stunning images of General Thrakos's surrender. They were miners, traders, explorers, medical personnel, ordinary beings from dozens of species who had decided that genocide was wrong regardless of who committed it. Prince Vorthak's voice crackled with rage across the communication networks. "Civilian vessels, withdraw immediately or be classified as enemy combatants." "Try it," came the response from Captain Morale. "Fire on unarmed hospital ships and refugee transports. Show the galaxy exactly what kind of leader you really are." The standoff had become something unprecedented, not just a military confrontation, but a moral referendum broadcast live across the civilized galaxy. Vorthak found himself in the impossible position of either backing down or committing atrocities in full view of countless witnesses, but the prince's response demonstrated why he had been so successful as a conqueror. He had no shame. "So be it," he snarled. "All vessels open fire. Sweep this system clean." The Warfleet's weapons began charging with the distinctive whine of capital ship energy cannons. In moments, they would unleash enough firepower to sterilize planets. That's when Kael made his choice. He didn't transform into his full dragon form. That would have been the monster Vorthak expected. Instead, he simply stepped outside the normal laws of physics. One moment, he was standing beside Lyra in the communication chamber. The next, he was floating in the void between Ethermore and the Warfleet, his human form surrounded by an aura of starfire that made him visible across the entire system. "Vorthak," his voice somehow carried through vacuum to reach every ship, every communication array, every sensor array in the system. "You want to face a Dragon Emperor? Here I am." The prince's flagship, Dominator, immediately swiveled its main guns toward Kael's tiny figure. "Target acquired, fire!" The energy beams that erupted from the warship were designed to punch through the armor of battleships. They struck Kael dead on and simply disappeared, absorbed into the starfire that surrounded him like a personal aurora. "My turn," Kael said quietly. What happened next would be debated by military analysts for generations. Kael didn't destroy Vorthak's fleet. That would have been the action of a monster. Instead, he did something far more devastating to the prince's reputation. He made them helpless. Moving faster than light itself, Kael flowed between the Warfleet's vessels like liquid starlight. He didn't breach their hulls or harm their crews. He simply turned off their weapons. Energy cannons went dead. Missile systems refused to launch. Shields flickered and died. Within minutes, the most feared Warfleet in the galaxy was floating helpless in the void. "Impossible!" Vorthak raged from his flagship's bridge. "How did you—" "I'm an ancestral dragon," Kael replied, now standing on the Dominator's bridge despite never having entered through any visible doorway. "We built the technologies your weapons are based on. Did you really think we wouldn't know how to turn them off?" Around him, Vorthak's bridge crew cowered in terror, not of violence, for Kael radiated no threat, but of the sheer impossibility of what they were witnessing. "Kill him!" Vorthak screamed to his guards. "Shoot him down!" But the guards' weapons, like everything else on the ship, had simply stopped working. "Prince Vorthak," Kael said formally, "I offer you the same choice I offered General Thrakos. Surrender now, and your crews will be safely transferred to the civilian vessels. Refuse, and remain here to contemplate your hatred while the galaxy moves toward a better future." "I'll never surrender to dragon scum." "Then you'll have a long time to consider that decision," Kael replied sadly. "Your ships still have life support and basic propulsion. You can sit here in the dark for as long as your pride requires." He began to fade from the bridge, returning to Ethermore through means that physics couldn't explain, but paused at Vorthak's cry of desperation. "Wait, this isn't over. The Galactic Council will never accept dragon rule. They'll send more fleets, bigger weapons." "They will," Kael agreed gently, "but they'll also send diplomats now because today the galaxy saw what dragons are really like. We had the power to destroy you, Prince Vorthak. We chose mercy instead. That choice will echo across every star system, in every heart that still remembers what honor means." As Kael disappeared, leaving Vorthak's fleet floating powerless but unharmed, the communication channels erupted with cheers from the civilian vessels. More ships were arriving every hour, not warships but hospital ships, supply vessels, and diplomatic transports carrying representatives from dozens of worlds. The age of hiding was over. The age of fear was ending. And in the crystal spires of Ethermore, Princess Lyra Vexhai embraced her bonded mate as they watched the dawn of a new era, an era where love had conquered hatred, wisdom had triumphed over violence, and hope had proven stronger than 3,000 years of lies. The last Dragon Emperor had awakened not as a monster, but as a teacher, showing the galaxy what true power looked like when tempered by compassion. 6 months later, the great crystal amphitheater of Ethermoor blazed with lights from 1,000 different worlds as delegates from across the galaxy gathered for the signing of the Dragon Accords, the first interspecies treaty to formally recognize dragons as equals, rather than threats to be contained. Princess Lyra Vexhai stood at the ceremonial podium, no longer wearing the confining gowns of her royal upbringing, but dressed in the flowing robes that marked her as the first ambassador of draconic relations. The transformation that had begun in the palace ruins had reached its completion. The sheltered princess had become a leader whose voice could move civilizations. 6 months ago, she addressed the assembled delegates. This galaxy stood on the brink of repeating one of its greatest atrocities. Fear, hatred, and propaganda nearly led us to complete the genocide we began 3,000 years ago. Today, we choose a different path. In the audience, she could see faces that had become familiar over months of negotiations. Admiral Korath sat beside General Thrakus, both of whom had become unexpected advocates for dragon rights after witnessing the truth of Ethermoor. Captain Morale and dozens of other civilian ship commanders who had risked everything to stand against tyranny filled an entire section. Even some of Prince Vorthak's former officers were present, men and women who had finally seen their commander's true nature and chosen to serve justice instead of blind authority. Notably absent was Vorthak himself, still sitting in his powerless flagship in the outer system, refusing all offers of clemency and food aid, sustained only by his hatred and his ship's emergency rations. The Dragon Accords, Lyra continued, establish more than just peace between our peoples. They create a new model for how power should be used in a civilized galaxy, not to dominate or exploit, but to protect and nurture. At the side of the amphitheater, Kael watched his bonded mate with pride that blazed through their connection like warm starlight. In the months since the confrontation with Vorthak, he had worked tirelessly to rebuild the trust between dragons and the rest of galactic civilization. It had not been easy. 3 millennia of hatred couldn't be erased overnight, but progress was being made. More importantly, dragons were emerging from hiding across the galaxy. Secret communities on dozens of worlds were revealing themselves, no longer forced to disguise their nature or accept persecution in silence. The population estimates had been wildly wrong. Instead of a few thousand scattered individuals, there were nearly 500,000 dragons throughout the galaxy, all of whom had been living in fear until Lyra's courage gave them hope. The Accords established 3 fundamental principles, Lyra announced to the hushed assembly. First, that no sentient being may be persecuted solely on the basis of species or genetic heritage. Second, that power carries the obligation to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And third, that justice delayed is justice denied. We will not wait another 3,000 years to right the wrongs of the past. King Aldrich rose from his place in the Zephyrian delegation, his expression mixing pride and sadness as he looked at his daughter. Their relationship had been strained by her choices, but time had proven her wisdom. The alliance between Zephyria and the Dragon Sanctuary had brought unprecedented prosperity to both peoples, and Lyra's diplomatic work had elevated their small world to a position of galactic influence. The Royal House of Zephyria, he announced formally, pledges its full support to the Dragon Accords and to the new Interspecies Council that will oversee their implementation. One by one, other delegations rose to add their support. Not every world was represented. Several major powers had refused to attend, and some regions of the galaxy remained hostile to dragon refugees. But enough voices had been raised to create momentum for real change. Elder Thysia, now serving as the elected representative of the Dragon Sanctuary, approached the podium with the ceremonial signing crystal. "For 3,000 years my people have dreamed of this moment," she said, her ancient voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater. "Not revenge against those who wronged us, but recognition that we too are children of the stars, deserving of dignity and peace." As the signing ceremony concluded, delegates began to mingle in the reception halls, but Lyra slipped away to find a moment of quiet with Kael. They walked together through the crystal gardens that had become their private sanctuary, the place where they went to remember who they were, beneath the weight of their public roles. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, settling beside him on their favorite bench overlooking the silver waterfalls. Giving up your anonymity, accepting the responsibility of being the last Dragon Emperor? Never, Kael replied without hesitation. For 3,000 years, I thought redemption meant hiding from my mistakes. You taught me that redemption means using the lessons of the past to build a better future. Through their bond, she felt the deep contentment that had replaced his ancient guilt. The man who had once lived as a beggar in shame now served as the spiritual leader of his people, teaching young dragons to use their power wisely and working with other species to heal old wounds. "What about you?" he asked. "Do you miss your old life, the certainty of knowing exactly what was expected of you?" Lyra laughed, the sound like silver bells in the crystal air. "That wasn't certainty, it was prison. I'd rather face 1,000 unknown challenges with you than spend one more day in a golden cage, no matter how comfortable." As if summoned by their conversation, a small dragon hatchling came tumbling through the garden paths, chasing a butterfly with the single-minded determination that only the very young possessed. Behind her came her mother, one of the refugees who had fled to Ethermoor in the months following the Accords. "Princess, Emperor!" the hatchling called out joyfully, using the informal titles that had become common among the dragon children. "Did you see? I caught 3 butterflies today. Mama says if I keep practicing, someday I'll be able to catch shooting stars." "I'm sure you will," Lyra said solemnly, accepting the tremendous honor of being included in the child's play. "But remember, catching shooting stars is only worthwhile if you plan to make wishes on them." The hatchling nodded seriously and scampered off to continue her games, leaving her mother to shake her head in amusement. "Thank you," the mother dragon said quietly, "for giving us a world where our children can play without fear, where they can dream of catching stars instead of hiding from them." After the mother and child had gone, Kael and Lyra sat in comfortable silence, watching the alien sun set behind the crystal spires of their adopted home. The galaxy was far from perfect. There were still those who preached hatred, still worlds where dragons faced persecution, still battles to be fought for justice and equality. But they were no longer fighting alone. "Look," Lyra said, pointing to the evening sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Do you see that?" Kael followed her gaze to where a formation of ships was moving across the heavens, not warships or hunting fleets, but mixed convoys of dragon and non-dragon vessels working together to establish new trade routes, explore uncharted systems, and carry the message of the Accords to distant worlds. "Partnership," he said softly, "the thing my ancestors dreamed of but never achieved, true cooperation between species, based on mutual respect rather than fear." "Our children will grow up in a very different galaxy," Lyra mused, one hand unconsciously moving to her abdomen, where the first signs of their bonded offspring were beginning to manifest. Dragon-Zephyrian hybrids were unprecedented, but their child would be born into a world where difference was celebrated rather than feared. "They'll have challenges we can't imagine," Kael agreed, "but they'll also have opportunities we never dreamed possible." As full darkness fell, the crystal city began to glow with its own inner light, and in that gentle radiance the last Dragon Emperor and his bonded princess planned for a future that neither of their peoples could have imagined alone. The beggar who had become a king and the princess who had chosen freedom over safety had not just found love, they had found purpose. And in finding that purpose, they had shown an entire galaxy that even the most ancient hatreds could be overcome by courage, compassion, and the simple recognition that all sentient beings deserved dignity. The Age of Dragons had not ended with the Great Purge. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to begin again, and in the crystal gardens of Ethermoor, surrounded by the laughter of children who would never know shame for what they were, that new age was finally dawning.